So here we've got a two-wheel drive and it's off-road at Werribee's 4x4 training ground. It's the Suzuki Vitara front-wheel drive and it's actually going for off-road for a couple of different reasons. Well, I guess it's a Suzuki, so there's that sort of inbuilt with the Suzuki DNA. But the first thing it's got in its favour is it's really light, and I mean really, really light. It weighs about just over a tonne, and for any car these days, that's incredibly light, especially for an SUV. Now, it's also got, if you look at this here, look at the way that the front wheels are always in contact with the ground going over that. You also might see that I'm driving it slightly to the right of the track there, just to try and keep all four wheels in the ground. But look at that. Both front wheels are always in contact with the ground, and it's only the rear wheel which is really bouncing up and down. So that's kind of the key to the advantage, how this two-wheel drive actually manages to get anywhere. And that is the fact that it's not only lightweight, but what weight it does have is very much over the front axle, and that is how, with a careful bit of throttle control, I can manage to drive it over those logs there. It doesn't have low range, but it does have a fairly revvy engine there, and the automatic torque converter works quite well. There we go down the hill there, not a lot of weight on the back wheels, but that's fine, and just zip our way out of that. Here we're coming down a really steep hill, and because all the weight's over on the front wheels, and that's even when the vehicle's on level ground, when you're coming down a steep hill, you've got so little weight on the back wheels, it's fairly easy to lose the back end. So it's really important just to keep the vehicle absolutely straight and not lock those rear wheels. Otherwise you're going to start sliding, and that's really not the best idea in that sort of situation. Again, look at that rear wheel lift there, all that weight over the front wheels. Because if the car was equally balanced, then one of the front wheels would actually be in the air and you'd lose grip. And take a look now as we drive it through these holes here, and just see how you saw the front view earlier on. Just look at the rear view and see how readily the rear wheel just comes up into the air as we go over there. See that? Just straight up. And we know from the previous video that the front axle is always on the ground. Do that one again. You've really got to be careful with your lines when you're going through terrain like this. It helps that the Vitara's very narrow, or relatively narrow, and easy to manoeuvre with a tight turning circle. We don't really need a turning circle here, but there's not a lot of ground clearance, and the approach angle is pretty compromised. The departure angle is not too bad. The ramp over angle isn't good, but it's got a fairly short wheelbase, so that can be somewhat negated as well. And coming out of here, it's all about momentum, and especially with the wet tyres and it's pulling up here. You can see the traction control working a bit, and that's fairly effective on this car there. One tip I did find is that you don't want the stability control to kick in, so to get around that, what I did was ensure that the vehicle was going as straight as possible, so the stability control didn't think the world was coming to an end and apply the brakes. Doesn't always work, you have to turn the car a bit around there, but if you're making it smooth so the car's not sliding anywhere, then you can drive fairly effectively and have the traction control work for you, but the stability control not work against you. Again, just look at that rear wheel lift there, all the weight on the front wheels, and that allows also good engine braking. Not good braking, engine braking's pretty ordinary on this thing. And if you see up here, we've got enough traction on the front wheels to be able to pull the car up there. It needs a bit of momentum. Look at the right rear wheel as we go across this. Again, that just lifts there. Now, this car wouldn't be anything like as capable if we had a couple of people sitting in the back, and the reason is that we wouldn't be able to get, the front wheels wouldn't be on the ground as effectively as you see them at the moment, and then clearances would be reduced, power to weight would be reduced, and it's all bad. So it's not a car that takes a load and then expect to do this, but with just me in it, then it's surprisingly effective off-road. These tracks, by the way, are used by low-range four-wheel drive training and vehicle launches and all sorts of things, and so it's quite amusing for me to just drive this two-wheel drive really cheap SUV around the tracks that people launch low range vehicles on for the press. So amusing. You see that it's so easy with the good brakes and the light weight just to be able to just ease it over the top of ledges like that. Here again, you just need a little bit of momentum just to keep the car going and keep it as straight as you can going up the hill. This is pretty much good practice anyway, but in a car like that, it kind of forces you to drive more and more. If it was a low-range four-wheel drive, pretty much goes anywhere you point it, in this it's very easy for it. But a car like that, you start got to think about your throttle, your lines, your traction, way more than you would normally in a low-range vehicle. Now over here, I'm going to run out of approach angles, so the technique I use is to go over the top and then start turning before I get to the bottom. And you can see that happening about now, so turning hard there. So before I get to the bottom, turning hard. Now what that does, that in effect increases your approach angle. Now it is turning whilst you're on a hill, which sounds like a bad idea, but in a vehicle that light and with a low centre of gravity, it's actually okay. And it's not as if you're going with a massive side angle anyway. Get another sort of fairly loose uphill here, just needs a bit of power, pick your line and straight up. And you can see the car's not bouncing from side to side, because I picked the line properly again, it's fairly light, so I'm just going to keep all four wheels on the ground. Here again, coming up this hill, coming up at an angle and then straightening up, and the reason for that is just to maximise the approach angle, otherwise we would run out of it. Fairly big snout there, and again that rear wheel's lifting there. A bit of inside wheel spin there, but going at slow speed, the traction control sort of quelled that quite nicely and kept moving. Yeah, another rear wheel lift here. You can see that the rear wheel stops rotating because I'm on the brakes. Not hard enough to lock everything, but just a little bit. And not a lot of clearance there, so just going real slow and just picking the line, because the faster you go, the more the suspension compresses and the less clearance you have. So just nice and slow over that, maintaining braking all the way through. And again, you're going to see there, this is a relatively steep, so I'm turning all the way to the left now, and that's just to maximise the approach angle as we exit that hill there. So there you go, that's it. The Suzuki Grand Vitara works off-road.